Two worlds collide. Graham Cole's world was built on walls, metaphorical and literal. The sprawling estate he returned to after the hospital was not merely a home. It was a fortress of stone, glass, and manicured hedges designed to project permanence and control. Every inch of its architecture screamed wealth and careful curation. Yet within those walls, the silence was almost suffocating. The house staff moved discreetly, rarely engaging unless spoken to. Meetings were held in grand offices or sterile boardrooms, not kitchens or playrooms. Even Bella's bedroom, though furnished with the best toys money could buy, lacked the warmth of a lived-in space. It was a room where every stuffed animal was lined neatly on a shelf, every picture frame chosen by decorators rather than family. That night, after Bella had been discharged from the hospital with instructions for further tests and follow-ups, Graham sat in his study, staring into the glow of the fireplace. His daughter was asleep upstairs, her small frame curled protectively around her worn stuffed rabbit. He, however, could not rest. His mind replayed the events at the restaurant again and again. The moment Bella's spoon dropped, the way panic had surged through him like a storm, and the strange calm of the waitress who had taken control of the situation with a confidence that belonged in a hospital, not a dining hall. He remembered her voice, firm yet tender, her steady hands, and the unshakable focus she had on Bella. In a world where most people hesitated, calculating consequences and appearances, Maya had acted without hesitation. It unsettled him. Graham had spent years learning to trust no one outside the narrow circle of advisors and associates he paid handsomely. Even in grief, when Eliza had passed, his comfort came less from friends and more from the mechanical continuation of his business empire. Yet here he was, sitting awake because of a stranger who had knelt on a restaurant floor for his child. That image would not leave him. Maya's world, by contrast, was stitched together with exhaustion, sacrifice, and quiet resilience. She lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the city's less glamorous side, where the paint peeled in corners and the pipes groaned at odd hours. Her mother, once vibrant and full of humor, was bedridden after years of battling chronic illness that demanded constant care and expensive medication. The transition from pediatric nurse to waitress had not been a choice of ambition, but of necessity. Nursing had been her calling. She had loved the adrenaline of the ER, the urgency of helping children in distress, the profound satisfaction of easing fear with a steady hand. But when her mother's condition worsened and she required full-time support, Maya had taken a job at the restaurant, not glamorous, not fulfilling, but steady enough to provide health insurance and keep the bills from drowning her. The night after the seizure incident, Maya found herself scrubbing dishes at the back of the restaurant long after the last customer had gone. Her manager had made his disapproval clear, but the sting of his words mattered less to her than the lingering memory of the little girl she had cradled. She could still feel Bella's tiny body trembling under her palms, the weight of responsibility pressing down as though the child had been her own. And she could not forget the father's face. Graham, though she hadn't known his name until whispered gossip from co-workers had filled in the blanks. They spoke of him as a ruthless billionaire, a man of power and control, yet the eyes she had seen last night were not the cold ones of a tycoon. They had been desperate, vulnerable, filled with fear that stripped away all pretense. She had glimpsed the human beneath the armor. Their two worlds were not supposed to intersect again. For men like Graham, waitresses were invisible, serving staff to be dismissed once plates were cleared. For women like Maya, men like Graham existed only in headlines or on screens, figures too distant to touch. Yet fate has little regard for social rules, and once two lives brush against each other in a moment of raw humanity, separation becomes far less certain. 2 days later, Graham found himself parked in front of the restaurant long before opening hours. He had instructed his driver to wait discreetly, but his own presence there was impulsive, uncharacteristic, and unsettling. He told himself it was gratitude, that he owed Maya thanks for saving Bella, perhaps even a token gesture of appreciation. Yet beneath that reasoning lurked a gnawing curiosity. Who was this woman who had acted when he had faltered? Why did his daughter's laughter at a folded napkin linger in his heart more vividly than any smile she'd given during expensive photo shoots? When Maya arrived for her shift, clutching a worn satchel and walking briskly as though late, she nearly dropped her keys when the sleek black car door opened and Graham stepped out. He was immaculate as always, his expression serious, his presence impossible to ignore. Maya's first instinct was not awe but wariness. "Mr. Cole," she said cautiously, recognizing him instantly, though she had only known his name after the fact. "I wanted to thank you," Graham said simply. His voice, though even, carried the weight of someone unaccustomed to expressing personal gratitude. He extended a small box, elegant, wrapped in understated silver. Maya looked at it but did not take it. "I don't need gifts. I did what anyone trained would have done." "Perhaps," he replied, "but you did what no one else did. And you did it for my daughter." Her jaw tightened. "Your daughter needed care." That was enough reason. They stood in silence for a moment, the city's morning bustle beginning to stir around them. Graham was unaccustomed to resistance. In his world, gifts were accepted. Gratitude was expressed in formalities and interactions ended neatly, but Maya's refusal left him unsettled. He studied her face, noting the tiredness around her eyes, the determination in her posture. "Bella asked about you," he said at last. That startled her. She had expected many things. A dismissal, perhaps even scolding for embarrassing him in public, but not this. "She asked?" "She wanted to know where the napkin bunny lady went." A faint smile touched his lips, quickly gone. "She doesn't laugh easily these days." "You managed to reach her." Maya felt an ache in her chest. Children had always been her soft spot, their innocence a fragile thread too often frayed by life's cruelties. To know she had given a little girl even a moment of joy, it mattered more than any silver-wrapped box. "I'm glad," she said quietly. Graham hesitated, then spoke with a rare openness. "Would you consider meeting her again? Just for a short time. She doesn't connect easily and I—" He stopped himself, realizing he was exposing vulnerability to a stranger. It would mean a great deal to her. Maya's instinct was to refuse. Their worlds were too far apart, and involvement with a man like Graham could only complicate her already difficult life. But the memory of Bella's giggles tugged at her heart. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. "I'll see what I can do," she said softly. And in that moment, the collision of their worlds deepened. A billionaire accustomed to control and distance had reached out for help, not with money but with sincerity. A waitress who had long since stopped believing her life could matter beyond survival found herself agreeing, not for him, but for the child whose fragile laughter she could not forget. Neither of them realized then that this small concession, this simple agreement to meet again, was the hinge upon which their futures would turn. For what began as gratitude and obligation would soon unravel into something neither expected, a bond that would test their fears, challenge their worlds, and ultimately change the course of their lives forever. The night that changed everything, the carefully arranged dinner. The restaurant glowed with a soft amber warmth, each table dressed in crisp linen and centered with candles that burned low and steady. Charleston's elite dined here, judges, CEOs, visiting diplomats, people who cared about appearances and whose reputations could be polished or shattered by a single headline. For Graham Cole, billionaire investor and widowed father, this was precisely the kind of stage his advisors thought he needed. The plan had been scripted. He would arrive not as the powerful negotiator who crushed rivals in the boardroom, but as a loving father, a man softened by his devotion to his 5-year-old daughter, Bella. That image was what the PR team insisted would rescue his reputation from whispers of arrogance and detachment, and so Graham sat at table 14. His tailored navy suit precise, his cufflinks discreet but telling, his hair combed without a strand astray. Across from him, little Bella shifted restlessly on a booster seat, her blonde curls bouncing with each movement. She was dressed in a pale blue dress chosen not by her father but by his assistant. She had been coached to smile politely for photographs that would be taken discreetly by a hidden photographer near the bar. What Graham hadn't accounted for was Bella's mood. The child was quiet, withdrawn, her small hands folded on her lap. She did not want to be here. She wanted her picture books, her stuffed rabbit, the safety of home. Graham glanced at her uneasily. His late wife, Eliza, had always known how to coax joy out of Bella. But Eliza had been gone 2 years now, and Graham had filled the silence with meetings, investments, and strategies. He knew balance sheets, not bedtime songs. As he tried to smile at Bella, a waitress appeared. The waitress with the napkin bunny, her name tag read Maya, though Graham hardly noticed at first. She wasn't dressed to be noticed. Just a standard black uniform, apron tied neatly, hair pulled back in a practical bun. What caught his attention was not her appearance, but the way Bella's solemn eyes suddenly brightened when Maya crouched beside the table. "Hey there, Princess," Maya said softly, her voice gentle but playful. "Do you want to see a magic trick?" Bella blinked, hesitant. Graham frowned slightly, uncomfortable with the casual tone. But before he could object, Maya folded a napkin swiftly into the shape of a bunny, complete with floppy ears. She placed it on the table and wiggled it as if it were hopping across the linen. Bella giggled. The sound startled Graham. He hadn't heard that light, unguarded laugh in weeks. "Look, Daddy." "Bunny," Bella squealed, pointing. Graham forced a smile, nodding. "Yes, sweetheart. A bunny." Maya grinned, clearly pleased that she'd broken through the child's shell. "I'll be right back with your drinks," she said, standing. Graham watched her go, unsettled. Waitresses didn't usually take liberties with elite guests, yet for some reason he didn't stop her. The collapse one moment, Bella was giggling at the napkin bunny. The next, her tiny frame stiffened, her eyes rolled back, and the spoon she'd been holding clattered against the plate. "Bella?" Graham's voice sharpened, panic surging. He shoved back his chair so hard it toppled. "Bella!" Before he could reach her, Maya was already there. She moved with a speed that was all instinct and training, dropping to her knees beside Bella. "She's seizing," Maya said firmly, her voice cutting through the rising murmur of diners. Graham froze, his hands trembling. He had built empires, faced hostile investors, stared down senators, but in this moment he was helpless. "Your jacket. Fold it. Put it under her head," Maya ordered without looking up. He obeyed instantly, fumbling with the expensive fabric, sliding it beneath Bella's head. Maya positioned the child on her side, gently guarding her from striking the table. Her hands were steady, her presence calm, her voice a soft anchor in the chaos. "You're okay, baby girl," she whispered to Bella. "Just ride it through. You're not alone." The restaurant fell into silence. Forks paused midair. A wine glass was carefully set down, forgotten. Graham crouched beside them, his heart hammering. She was fine. She was laughing. "She'll be okay," Maya murmured. "She's stabilizing." Slowly, the rigid tension in Bella's limbs softened. Her breathing evened. Her body relaxed into stillness. Graham exhaled shakily, a prayer slipping unbidden from his lips. A hostess hovered nearby, pale. I called an ambulance. "They're on their way." Maya nodded, brushing Bella's damp curls off her forehead. "Good, she needs to be checked." Graham looked at Maya, desperate. "How did you know what to do?" "I used to work pediatric emergency," she replied quietly. Before this, the manager's fury blue lights flared outside. Paramedics entered swiftly, loading Bella into Graham's arms as he carried her out. He glanced back once, meeting Maya's eyes. "You saved her." But before she could answer, he was gone. Maya rose slowly, her knees aching from the hard marble floor. Her apron was stained, her hands trembling. She poured herself a glass of water from a station, trying to steady her breath. Then she heard her manager's voice. "What the hell was that, Maya?" She turned, confused. "What?" "You hijacked a high-profile guest's table. Do you even realize who that was? You made a scene in front of the entire restaurant." "His daughter was in crisis," Maya said evenly. "I did what I was trained to do. You touched the child, you got on the floor, you disrupted every table around you. That man is a billionaire. Do you know what this could cost us?" Maya straightened, anger flashing. "I saved her. If I hadn't, she could have been seriously hurt." "You're a waitress, not a nurse," the manager snapped. "Stay in your lane." "I used to be a nurse," Maya said, her voice low but unyielding. "Pediatric emergency. Until my mother got sick and I had to take whatever job offered health insurance." The manager sneered but turned away, muttering about consequences. Maya stood rooted, her chest tight. She had saved a little girl's life, and yet somehow she felt like she had just destroyed her own. Graham's turmoil. Meanwhile, in the back of the ambulance, Graham held Bella close as medics checked her vitals. His chest ached with relief and terror. He kept seeing Maya's face, the calm authority, the way she whispered to Bella as though she were her own child. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. His carefully staged dinner had collapsed into chaos. The wealthy woman he was supposed to meet had never shown up. His daughter had seized in front of a room full of strangers. And the only genuine moment of the night had come from an uninvited waitress. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Graham realized something unsettling. He trusted that waitress more than anyone else in that restaurant. The new family. The winter evening had settled over Charleston like a heavy quilt, muffling the city's usual hum in a hush of cold air. The Cole estate glowed against the darkness, its many windows spilling golden light across the manicured lawns. Inside, warmth reigned. Bella sat curled on the carpet in front of the fireplace, arranging her collection of stuffed animals into an elaborate tea party. Maya sat beside her, holding a tiny teacup in one hand and offering a steady stream of playful banter that sent the little girl into fits of giggles. Graham watched from the sofa, a glass of water in his hand, his chest tight with a kind of peace he had not felt in years. These small evenings, filled with laughter and softness, had become his most cherished hours, the kind that made the chaos of the outside world feel remote and irrelevant. And yet, beneath the glow of contentment, Graham sensed the fragility of it all. The media storm had not fully quieted. His advisors continued to circle like vultures, warning him of reputational collapse, of alienated investors, of a world eager to see him stumble. Maya, though steady on the surface, still carried the weariness of scrutiny. He could see it in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, the shadow of fear that their fragile sanctuary might be shattered. And Bella, though happier than she had been in years, was still a child marked by loss, her laughter brighter but still delicate, like porcelain that could chip at the wrong touch. The test came on a night no one expected. Bella had been full of energy that afternoon, running through the garden with Maya, squealing at the way autumn leaves crunched under her boots. But by evening she was quiet, her cheeks flushed. Maya noticed first, her hand brushing the girl's forehead. The heat beneath her palm was alarming. "She's burning up," Maya said, her voice low, controlled, but edged with urgency. Graham was instantly on his feet. "I'll call the doctor." Maya shook her head, already lifting Bella into her arms. "Not a doctor. An ambulance. She's too hot and her breathing. Listen." She tilted Bella gently, and Graham's stomach dropped at the sound of the shallow, labored breaths. The memory of the restaurant seizure hit him like a blow. Fear surged through his chest, threatening to paralyze him, but this time Maya was there, steady and sure. She issued instructions with the calm precision of the nurse she once was, guiding him to gather what was needed, to stay focused, to be present. By the time paramedics arrived, Bella was already stabilized in Maya's arms, her small body wrapped in cool cloths, her panic eased by Maya's whispering reassurance. At the hospital, hours blurred into each other. Graham paced, his fists clenched, every muscle taut with dread. Maya remained by Bella's side, refusing to leave even when nurses urged her to rest. Her hand never left Bella's. Her voice never stopped its gentle hum of comfort. Graham watched her, torn between gratitude and awe. She was not family, not bound by obligation, yet she gave more than anyone else could. She poured herself out for his daughter, as though the child were her own. When the doctors finally emerged with cautious smiles and reassurances that it was a severe infection but treatable, that Bella would recover with rest and care, Graham's knees nearly buckled with relief. He returned to the room to find Maya still there, stroking Bella's hair, her own eyes weary but unyielding. "You saved her again," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Maya shook her head. "No, the doctors did. You stayed," he said firmly, cutting her off. "You were steady when I couldn't be. That matters more than you know." In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines and fluorescent light, the walls Graham had clung to for years crumbled completely. He realized, with a clarity that left no room for denial, that Maya was no longer simply the woman who had saved his daughter's life, nor the outsider his advisors dismissed, nor even the companion Bella adored. She was the missing piece of their fractured family, the one who had stepped into their darkness and brought light they had thought lost forever. When Bella was discharged days later, weaker but smiling, Graham made a choice. He called his advisors together, gathered them in his vast office where deals worth billions had been signed, and told them plainly that their opinions no longer dictated his life. "My daughter's happiness," he said, his voice as sharp as steel, "is worth more than any investor's approval, and the woman who gave her that happiness will not be treated as a liability in my presence again. If any of you cannot respect that, then you are free to resign." The silence that followed was stunned, but Graham did not flinch. For once he was not negotiating, not strategizing, he was declaring, And though several walked away in the days that followed, the ones who remained learned quickly that a new era had begun. For Maya, the shift was both terrifying and freeing. She had braced herself for rejection, for the inevitable moment when Graham would retreat into his fortress and leave her to bear the weight of scandal alone. Instead, he had stood beside her, not in secret but in full view of the world. It frightened her, yes, but it also awakened something she had long buried, the belief that she was worthy of standing, not as a shadow, but as an equal. The weeks that followed were not without challenges. The tabloids continued their noise, though slowly their stories lost power as Graham refused to feed them. Bella's recovery was steady, her laughter returning with renewed strength. And in the quiet spaces between chaos, Graham and Maya found themselves drawn closer, not with dramatic declarations, but with the steady rhythm of shared life. Cooking dinner together while Bella colored at the table. Long conversations by the fireplace where Graham spoke of his late wife with a vulnerability he had never shared before, and Maya spoke of her fears of not belonging, of being broken by the weight of expectation. They built trust not in grand gestures, but in the small, consistent ways they chose to stay. The moment of unspoken truth came on a gentle spring evening. Bella had fallen asleep early, her fever finally gone, her breathing steady. Graham and Maya stood in the garden, the air fragrant with blooming jasmine, the sky painted in shades of dusk. For a long while they said nothing, simply listening to the quiet rustle of leaves. Then Graham turned to her, his voice low but resolute. "I don't want to keep building walls, Maya. I've lived behind them too long. You've shown me what's outside them, and I can't go back." He paused, searching her eyes. "I know our worlds are different. I know it won't be easy. But I also know this. I don't want to face another day without you in it. Not for me, not just for Bella, but because with you I feel alive again." Maya's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness but from the overwhelming weight of the choice before her. She had built her life around sacrifice, around surviving. But standing there, hearing the sincerity in his voice, seeing the vulnerability in the man the world called untouchable, she felt the walls inside her break too. "I don't know if I can live in your world," she admitted softly. "It's harsh and I'm not built for it." "Then we'll build a new one," he replied simply. Together, the words hung in the night air, not dramatic, not rehearsed, but real. And in that reality lay their future. Not perfect, not easy, but authentic. Months later, the sight of them together no longer drew scandalized headlines. The world had moved on, as it always does, chasing newer stories. What remained was what mattered. A little girl who laughed freely again, a man who rediscovered his heart, and a woman who finally believed she was worthy of love not for what she sacrificed, but for who she was. And so the story that had begun with a restaurant, a napkin bunny, and a seizure ended not with spectacle, but with something quieter and infinitely stronger. A family, imperfect but whole, forged not by wealth or reputation, but by the courage to break walls and choose each other. Breaking walls, the press conference had been like dropping a stone into a still lake. Ripples spread in every direction, unsettling waters far beyond what Graham anticipated. Overnight, he was branded by some as courageous, a man finally stepping out of the gilded cage of public opinion to defend a woman without status. To others, he was reckless, foolishly risking his carefully curated image for the sake of a fleeting attachment. Investors called nervously. Reporters camped outside his gates, and even old acquaintances reached out with veiled warnings that he was sabotaging his own legacy. Yet amid the noise, Graham felt something he had not in years: clarity. For once, he had not acted based on strategy or calculation. He had spoken the truth, and the truth had felt liberating. For Maya, however, the storm still raged with brutal force. The sudden spotlight was relentless. Strangers shouted questions at her as she left her apartment, snapping photos she had no strength to fight against. Some called her a hero, others a parasite, and the whiplash of praise and vilification was exhausting. She had not sought Graham's defense, had not wanted her life thrust into the merciless cycle of media obsession. Yet when she watched the footage of him standing firm, his jaw tight, his voice unwavering, declaring that she had brought light back into his daughter's life, her chest ached with something more complicated than fear. It was gratitude, yes, but it was also a dawning awareness of the man beneath the billionaire, the father beneath the fortress. Still, she kept her guard. The gulf between their worlds was not something public opinion could erase. She was a woman who lived paycheck to paycheck, whose evenings were spent spoon-feeding her mother and soothing her pain, whose days were long shifts filled with exhaustion. He was a man who had more money than she could fathom, who lived in a mansion guarded by walls both physical and social. Gratitude did not erase the imbalance, nor did hope erase the danger of being crushed by it. One evening, Graham arrived unannounced at her apartment. Maya was startled when she opened the door to find him standing in the dim hallway, far removed from the grandeur he usually carried. He wore no suit, just a simple shirt, his eyes shadowed by fatigue. Behind him, the building's peeling paint and flickering lights felt like stark symbols of the distance between their lives. "I shouldn't have come," he said quietly, glancing down the hall. "But I needed to see you." Maya stepped aside, conflicted but unwilling to turn him away. Inside, the apartment was modest to the point of bare. Stacks of medical supplies lined one corner. Her mother's faint voice drifting from the bedroom where she lay resting. Graham took it in silently, his gaze lingering not in judgment but in recognition of a life built on sacrifice. "You shouldn't be here," Maya murmured, folding her arms. "The cameras will follow. If they find out where I live, I don't care," he interrupted, his tone sharper than intended. Then softening, he added, "Maya, I know this isn't easy for you, and I know my world has made it harder. But I need you to understand I meant every word I said. You are not a scandal. You are the reason my daughter is smiling again. And I won't pretend otherwise, not for them." She looked at him, torn between anger and the pull of his sincerity. "You don't understand. This isn't about you. It's about me. My job is hanging by a thread, my mother is sick, and now strangers know my name. You can say you don't care about the cameras, but I'm the one they chase when you're not around. I'm the one they call names." "I do understand," he said firmly. "I watched them do the same to Eliza in different ways. They picked apart her every move, her clothes, her smile. It nearly broke her. And I stood by, powerless to shield her. I won't make the same mistake again." Maya's breath caught. For the first time, she glimpsed the grief he carried not as a businessman but as a widower. The hardness in his eyes softened, revealing wounds that had never healed. And in that shared vulnerability, something shifted between them. An unspoken recognition that beneath wealth and poverty, beneath privilege and struggle, they were both simply people scarred by loss, clinging to what they loved. Over the following weeks, Graham's defiance grew bolder. He brought Maya and Bella to public places, no longer hiding them in private estates or secluded gardens. He walked beside them, unflinching as photographers snapped photos. The tabloids spun their narratives, some romanticizing him as a man brave enough to love below his station, others condemning him as careless. But Graham no longer bent beneath the weight of opinion. What mattered was Bella's laughter and Maya's steady presence. For Maya, the exposure remained agonizing, yet she could not deny the moments of unexpected warmth. Bella's small hand in hers, Graham's quiet gratitude when their eyes met across a room, the way the three of them began to form a rhythm that felt dangerously close to family. At times, she allowed herself to imagine what it might mean to belong, to live not as an outsider but as someone embraced. And then, almost immediately, she reminded herself of reality, her mother's failing health, her financial fragility, the inevitable judgment that came with stepping into Graham's orbit. One evening, after a long day, Maya found herself sitting with Graham in his library while Bella slept upstairs. The room was quiet, lined with towering shelves of books Graham rarely had time to read. A decanter of whiskey sat untouched on the table between them. For once they were not interrupted by staff nor distracted by Bella's needs. "You're different here," Maya said softly, her gaze sweeping the room. "How so?" he asked. "You're quieter, less controlled. It's like you let yourself breathe." Graham studied her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound as though I usually forget to." "Maybe you do," she replied, her tone gentle. "You carry the weight of an empire, of a reputation, of your daughter's future. But somewhere in all that you've forgotten how to just exist, not as Graham Cole, billionaire, but as Graham the man." Her words struck him deeply. Few dared speak to him so plainly. Fewer still with such honesty. He leaned back, exhaling. "And what if I don't remember who that man is?" "Then maybe," she said, meeting his gaze, "you let the people around you remind you." The silence that followed was charged, heavier than any business negotiation he had ever faced. Their eyes held, and in that moment the unspoken truth between them was undeniable. Gratitude had shifted into something deeper, admiration into something more dangerous. Yet neither reached across the table, neither broke the fragile boundary. For both, the stakes were too high, the risks too sharp, and so they sat. Two people bound by circumstance and choice, each silently acknowledging what their lips would not dare to speak. That walls, no matter how high, could not forever keep out the pull of the heart. It was in these quiet, charged evenings that Graham realized the true dilemma was no longer about reputation or scandal. It was about whether he had the courage to risk love again after loss, and whether Maya could trust herself to step into a world that had already tried to break her. The walls around them were cracking, and though neither knew what lay on the other side, both understood one truth with clarity. Those walls could not stand forever. A scandal bruise for a few precious weeks, Graham allowed himself to believe that balance could exist between the rigid expectations of his public life and the fragile sanctuary he was building with Bella and Maya. The time they spent together felt almost ordinary, and in its ordinariness lay a kind of magic he had long forgotten. Simple things. A trip to the farmer's market where Bella tasted honey from a wooden spoon. Afternoons when Maya helped her build castles out of cardboard boxes in the garden. Evenings when they all laughed over board games that Graham hadn't touched since his own childhood. These became the moments he carried with him, even into the cold sterility of boardrooms. They were small, private treasures unmeasured by profit margins or political influence, and they reminded him of something deeper than success. They reminded him of family. But the world Graham inhabited had little tolerance for simplicity. His life was a stage, and whether he wished it or not, there were always eyes watching, always whispers waiting to be spun into stories. It began innocently enough. A photo snapped by a passerby when Graham, in casual clothes, was spotted at a small bookstore with Maya and Bella. The picture, blurry but unmistakable, showed the billionaire kneeling beside his daughter, while a dark-haired woman held out a picture book. To an ordinary viewer, it was a charming scene of fatherhood. To the tabloids, it was bait, and within 24 hours headlines began to circulate. Mysterious woman spotted with Graham Cole and daughter, new romance. Graham's advisors reacted swiftly, calling emergency meetings to discuss damage control. They referred to Maya not by name but by category: the waitress, the liability, the risk. Around a long, polished table, they spoke of optics, narratives, and strategies. To them, Maya was not a person but a problem, a potential scandal threatening to unravel years of carefully crafted image. "You cannot be seen with her again," Graham, one of his senior consultants, declared, her voice clipped and precise. "It undermines everything we've been building. The narrative is supposed to be about you as a stable, respectable widower, ready to re-enter high society. This," she gestured to the projected headline on the screen, "does not fit. A waitress from a mid-tier restaurant? The public will not respect it. Investors will question your judgment. You must distance yourself immediately." Graham listened, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming the table. Normally he might have nodded, strategized, and conceded to their advice, but this time he felt a resistance rise within him. He saw Maya's face in his mind, her steady hands, her quiet resilience, the way Bella clung to her with absolute trust. Distance her? How could he explain that to his daughter, who asked for Maya nearly every night? How could he betray the woman who had already given them more than any of these advisors, with their polished suits and rehearsed words? When the meeting ended, Graham left without committing to their plan. His silence was its own defiance, though he knew the storm was only beginning. Maya, on the other hand, discovered the storm from a different angle. One morning, as she stepped into the restaurant where she still worked part-time shifts, she was met with a wall of stares. Whispers rippled through the staff, and when she glanced toward the hostess stand, she saw a tabloid magazine sprawled open with her face, grainy but identifiable, splashed beside Graham and Bella. The caption beneath screamed accusations of gold-digging romance, of a waitress ensnaring a billionaire. Her stomach sank. She had not asked for this, had not sought the attention, and yet here she was, reduced to a caricature in print. Customers eyed her differently, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled judgment. Her manager, never one to miss an opportunity to assert control, cornered her in the kitchen. "Well, well," he sneered, waving the magazine. "Looks like our little waitress has found herself a new career path. Tell me, Maya, how does one snag a billionaire while still serving mashed potatoes?" The humiliation burned, but Maya stood tall, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. I didn't ask for this attention. I was with his daughter, not selling my story to the press. Her manager laughed coldly. Doesn't matter what you were doing. Perception is everything. And the perception is that you've made a scene again. Don't think for a second this won't affect business. Some people don't want their fine dining experience served by someone who's gossip fodder. The implication was clear. Her job was on the line. Maya clenched her fists, anger and fear swirling together. But she refused to let him see her break. She finished her shift with quiet determination, though every whispered laugh felt like a knife. That evening, when Graham called, she almost didn't answer. When she finally did, her voice carried the weight of her exhaustion. You have to stop this, Mr. Cole. Whatever it is you think you're doing by keeping me around, it's ruining my life. My job, my reputation, people think I'm using you. On the other end of the line, Graham's voice was calm but resolute. You didn't create this, they did. And I won't let them make you the villain for caring about my daughter. It doesn't matter what the truth is, Maya said bitterly. They'll twist it however they want. And you can weather it. You're untouchable. But me? I don't have your money, your name, your fortress. I can't survive that kind of scrutiny. There was a long pause. When Graham spoke again, his voice was softer. Then let me protect you. Maya's laugh was hollow. You can't, not from this. The only protection I have is staying away. The words cut Graham more deeply than he expected. He had grown used to people clinging to him for his resources, his influence. Yet here was someone pulling away not out of disdain, but out of fear of being destroyed by proximity. It was both infuriating and heartbreaking. In the days that followed, the tabloids only grew louder. Stories fabricated out of shadows painted Maya as a schemer, an opportunist, even a manipulator using Bella to secure her place in Graham's life. Paparazzi began lurking near her apartment, cameras flashing as she walked to the bus stop. Neighbors whispered. Colleagues snickered, and through it all, Maya bore the brunt of judgment she had never sought, but the one voice that refused to be silenced was Bella's. Every morning she asked her father when Maya was coming. Every night she clutched her stuffed rabbit and whispered, I want her, Daddy, I want Maya. It broke Graham's heart to see his daughter's newfound joy threatened by the cruelty of strangers. And it steeled his resolve. One evening, after a particularly vicious article circulated online, Graham called an emergency press conference. His advisors begged him to reconsider, warning him that addressing the matter publicly would only fuel the flames. But Graham was done with silence. Standing before a row of cameras, his jaw set, his voice unwavering, he declared, The woman you've seen in photos is not a scandal, not a gold digger, not a pawn. She is someone who saved my daughter's life, who brought light back into her world when grief had taken it away. I will not stand by while she is slandered for her kindness. If you want to attack someone, attack me, but leave her out of it. The statement sent shockwaves through the media. Some praised his courage, others criticized his recklessness, but one thing was clear. Graham had taken a stand. When Maya saw the footage that night, tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, someone had defended her publicly. Not as a means to an end, but because it was right. And though her fear remained, so too did a spark of something else. Something she had long buried under layers of sacrifice and survival. It was hope. Healing hearts. The quiet weeks that followed the meeting at the park shifted the rhythm of all three lives in ways subtle but undeniable. For Bella, it meant an expanding world of laughter and warmth. A reprieve from the cold rituals of her father's carefully curated schedule. For Graham, it meant watching, with an unease he could not suppress, as someone outside his meticulously controlled circle began to occupy more and more of his daughter's affections. And for Maya, it meant allowing herself, against her better judgment, to step back into a role she had long thought lost, the role of healer, of comforter, of someone whose presence brought light to a child's eyes. It started simply. Graham arranged for Maya to join them on small outings under the pretense of companionship for Bella. A trip to the aquarium, where Bella clung to Maya's hand as they pressed their noses to the glass and watched jellyfish float like living lanterns. A Saturday afternoon in the botanical gardens, where Maya crouched beside Bella to point out the hidden ladybugs under broad leaves, while Graham observed them from a distance with a mix of admiration and discomfort. Later, quiet evenings in the Cole estate where Maya would be invited to read Bella bedtime stories when Graham admitted he was poor at voices and accents. Bella bloomed under the attention. The shadows that had lingered since her mother's death lifted, slowly but noticeably. Her laughter became less rare, her appetite returned, and her once frequent nightmares diminished. She began to chatter again, about butterflies, about stories, about the silly way Maya could make her stuffed rabbit hop across the bed. Graham could not deny the results. For all his resources, for all his expensive therapists and advisors, it was Maya who had cracked open the shell that grief and trauma had built around his child. Yet with that gratitude came unease. Graham was not a man who liked depending on others, particularly not those outside his circle of trust. His world operated on clear hierarchies. He commanded, others obeyed. He provided, others accepted, but with Maya the lines blurred. She was not cowed by his wealth nor impressed by his status. She treated him with a courtesy born not of obligation, but of principle. And she never hesitated to challenge him when she felt it necessary. One evening, after Bella had finally drifted to sleep, Graham found himself lingering outside the nursery door. Inside, Maya was gently tucking the child's blankets, her voice soft as she finished the last lines of a story. When she stepped out, she nearly collided with him in the hallway. "She's asleep?" Graham asked unnecessarily. Maya nodded, lowering her voice. "Out like a light. She was tired from running in the garden all afternoon." "Good," he said, though his voice carried more weight than the simple word implied. For a moment they stood in silence, and then he surprised himself by saying, "You've done more for her than anyone else has since her mother." Maya looked at him, her expression soft but unyielding. "I haven't done anything magical, Mr. Cole. I've just listened. She needs to be seen, not just cared for." The word stung, though not with malice. Graham knew she was right. He had provided everything his fortune could buy, doctors, tutors, even private counselors flown in from across the country, but he had not known how to be present. Maya's presence, so natural and unforced, only highlighted his inadequacy. It humbled him in ways that boardroom defeats never could. Their interactions deepened in unexpected ways. At first, their conversations were brief, centered on Bella's needs, diet, routines, anxieties. But as time passed, they edged into more personal territory. Graham found himself asking about Maya's past, about why someone with her knowledge of pediatric emergencies was waiting tables in a restaurant. At first she deflected, but eventually the truth emerged. Her mother's illness, the crushing weight of medical bills, the painful choice to leave the career she loved. There was no self-pity in her telling, only a quiet acceptance that life demanded sacrifice. Graham listened, more moved than he let on. He was accustomed to people framing their stories as currency, as leverage for his sympathy or investment. Maya did neither. She spoke plainly, her dignity intact, her resilience shining through the cracks of hardship. And for reasons he could not quite name, he found himself respecting her more for it. But not everyone in his world shared that respect. The whispers began quietly at first, his advisors noting the inconvenience of his growing association with a woman outside their social circles. Then louder as one of his closest PR handlers bluntly told him over dinner, "You're risking everything for a waitress, Graham. The press will have a field day if this gets out. Think of your reputation, think of Bella's future. You cannot afford to entangle yourself with someone like her." The words grated, not only because of their content, but because of their dismissive tone. Someone like her. As though Maya were nothing more than a footnote, a disposable figure unworthy of respect. Graham bristled but said little at the time, though the anger simmered. Later, when he replayed the conversation, he realized how hollow his handler sounded compared to the unpretentious wisdom Maya offered in his hallways and gardens. For the first time, he began to question whether the fortress of reputation he had so carefully built was worth the cost of authenticity it demanded. Maya, for her part, felt the tension growing too. She noticed the glances from Graham's staff, the whispered judgments when she arrived. She saw the wary way the driver looked at her when she climbed into the back seat with Bella, as though questioning whether she belonged there. And while she told herself she did not care, after all, she was there for Bella, not for the approval of Graham's world, the unease lingered. It was not easy to step into a sphere where every movement was watched, every word weighed, and every gesture judged. Yet the bond she felt with Bella, outweighed the discomfort. She could not pull away, not when the child's eyes lit up every time she walked into the room, not when Bella clung to her hand at night as though to anchor herself against lingering fears. Maya told herself she was strong enough to endure the judgment, that she would simply remain steady for Bella's sake. But late at night, when she returned to her small apartment and collapsed onto her bed, she sometimes wondered if she was treading on dangerous ground. One evening crystallized the tension that had been building. Graham had arranged a dinner at the estate, a quiet meal for himself, Bella, and Maya. It was not formal, not a gala or a staged event, just a simple attempt at normalcy. Bella chattered happily, showing Maya drawings she had made that afternoon. Graham watched, his heart swelling with pride he rarely allowed himself to feel. But after Bella was tucked into bed, Graham and Maya found themselves lingering in the dining room, the soft glow of candlelight casting long shadows. For the first time, there was no buffer of staff, no distractions of business. "You shouldn't do this," Maya said suddenly, her voice firm though her eyes betrayed conflict. "Do what?" Graham asked, genuinely puzzled. "Bring me here. Let me into your world. People are already talking, and I don't want to be the reason your reputation suffers." Graham leaned back, studying her. "My reputation has survived far worse than the presence of someone who cares about my daughter." She shook her head. "You don't understand. Your world is different, ruthless. People like me don't belong in it." For a long moment he said nothing, then replied quietly, "Perhaps that's exactly why I need you in it." The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken with meanings neither dared to explore fully. For Graham, it was an admission that his fortress was crumbling, that he longed for the authenticity Maya embodied. For Maya, it was a warning that her carefully guarded boundaries were eroding under the weight of connection and gratitude. As the silence stretched, their eyes met, and in that gaze lay the unspoken truth. They were no longer simply a billionaire and a waitress, nor a father and a caretaker. They were two wounded souls who had found, however unexpectedly, a measure of healing in each other's presence. And though neither said it aloud, both knew the path ahead would not be simple, but it had already begun. The billionaire's dilemma. For a man like Graham Cole, decisions were usually measured in figures, strategies, and outcomes. His boardrooms thrived on precision, his investments lived and died by calculations. He was a man trained to recognize risks and eliminate uncertainties, yet nothing in his repertoire of business acumen prepared him for the uncertainty that now gnawed at him. It was not a deal or a merger that kept him awake at night. It was the soft memory of a waitress's steady voice, the haunting image of his daughter trembling in her arms, and the undeniable truth that his carefully constructed life had been exposed for its fragility. The days following the restaurant incident were filled with obligations that normally grounded him. Calls from investors, a charity gala he was expected to attend, a series of meetings with politicians whose goodwill was worth as much as any market surge. But through it all, his thoughts drifted back to Bella's laughter, to the rare sparkle in her eyes when Maya had made a napkin dance. He had poured money into therapists, tutors, and carefully curated experiences for his daughter. Yet none had reached her as easily as this woman who had no agenda, no polish, and no claim on their world. It left him with an uncomfortable truth. For all his power, there were spaces in his daughter's heart he simply did not know how to fill. The more he thought of it, the more Graham recognized the conflict building inside him. His public life was designed to be controlled. Every photo, every dinner, every handshake carefully orchestrated by advisors who reminded him of optics. And yet here was Maya, who had stepped into his orbit not because of a contract or strategy, but because she had acted instinctively, without hesitation. She had saved Bella, yes, but more than that, she had made Bella smile, and that smile had become priceless to him. The dilemma lay in the fact that he could not reconcile this raw humanity with the image his handlers expected him to project. To be seen consorting with a waitress was unthinkable for them. But for Bella, perhaps it was the only thing that mattered. Maya, meanwhile, carried her own storm. The restaurant had not been kind in the aftermath. Her manager's fury had simmered into something more dangerous than yelling. Cold detachment, subtle punishments, shifts reduced, customers reassigned. The whispers of colleagues followed her. Admiration from some, resentment from others who thought she had jeopardized the restaurant's reputation. Maya bore it with the same resilience that had carried her through night shifts in the ER and long hours at her mother's bedside. She told herself she had done the right thing, that saving a child's life was worth any consequence. And yet, late at night when she stared at the cracked ceiling of her apartment, she wondered if once again life was punishing her for doing what she thought was good. The irony was not lost on her. She had left nursing not because she failed, but because she had chosen to care for her mother. Now, even when she stepped into a crisis with skill and compassion, she found herself treated like a liability. It was as if life kept reminding her of the gulf between what she was meant to do and what she was forced to do. The only comfort she carried was the look of relief in Graham's eyes that night, the gratitude in his voice, and the knowledge that Bella had left the restaurant alive and safe. That had to be enough, but the world is rarely so simple. Graham reached out again, discreetly this time, arranging for Maya to meet Bella at a private park his family foundation maintained. It was presented to Maya as an opportunity to spend a few hours with Bella. No obligations, no strings attached, just a chance to let the child enjoy her company. Maya hesitated, torn between self-preservation and the tug in her heart, but ultimately agreed. She told herself it was for Bella, not for Graham, and not for any curiosity about the man who seemed to live in two worlds, ruthless billionaire and fragile father. When they met again, the atmosphere was entirely different from the restaurant. There were no watching diners, no disapproving managers, no staged appearances. It was simply a sunny afternoon, a quiet playground, and a child who brightened at the sight of her napkin bunny lady. Bella ran to Maya with the unguarded enthusiasm only a child could give, her small arms wrapping around Maya's legs. The sound of her laughter filled the air as Maya swung her gently onto a swing. Her hands steady, her smile wide. Graham watched from a distance, his chest tightening with a mix of relief and something he could not name. This was not a boardroom, not a gala, not a campaign. This was his daughter smiling, her hair flying back in the breeze, her eyes sparkling with life. And the woman responsible for that was not one of the carefully selected companions his PR team had paraded before him. It was Maya, the waitress they would consider beneath his notice. When Graham finally approached, Maya greeted him politely but without deference. She was not awed by his presence, and in a strange way he found it refreshing. They sat on a bench as Bella played, and for the first time in years Graham found himself speaking about things that were not measured in millions. He spoke of Bella's shyness since her mother's death, of his struggle to connect, of the endless parade of advisors who told him what a father should look like, but never what a father should feel. Maya listened, not with the rehearsed nods of his associates, but with genuine attentiveness. And then, when he finished, she said simply, "She doesn't need perfect, Mr. Cole, she just needs you. She needs to see you laugh, even if it's silly. She needs to feel that you're there, not as an image, but as her dad." Her words struck deeper than any polished speech he had heard in years. It was both humbling and liberating, though he would not admit it aloud. He was a man unaccustomed to being told he was wrong, yet here was someone half his power, half his wealth, telling him the truth he had avoided. And he knew she was right. As the afternoon wore on, Graham realized the danger in what was happening. Not danger in the sense of physical threat, but in the way his walls were beginning to crack. Maya represented everything his advisors would call a liability, ordinary, unpolished, unconnected. But she also represented something he could not buy, authenticity. And as Bella laughed, running across the grass with her hair flying wild, Graham felt the pull of that authenticity more strongly than he cared to admit. When they parted that day, Graham offered to have his driver take Maya home. She refused, saying she preferred the bus. He frowned, unused to refusals, but respected it. As she walked away, Bella tugged his sleeve and said with sleepy contentment, "Daddy, I like her." The words echoed in Graham's mind long into the night. He knew the world would not approve. His advisors would scoff, the media would circle like vultures, and his reputation, so carefully managed, would be put at risk. But for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe it was worth it. And that was his dilemma: to live in the fortress of control he had built, or to risk stepping into the messy, unpredictable world of genuine human connection.